Today, we are burning down your trees by teaching you how to beat one of the matchups that people don't really talk about, Rikka Sunavalon. And today with me, also burning down the trees, we have multi-YCS topper, legendary troll who's turned a new leaf, no pun intended, Squiddy.
We're turning a new leaf today.
Oh, we're burning them all down. Guys, before you do anything, go check out the link down in the description. Go to Squiddy's channel, hit that subscribe button for me. He's been a lot more active, and trust me, his channel is full of juicy nuggets of info. It can even help you top regionals, because I know his tips are just really, really solid, especially when it comes to when you're deck building your stuff. Probably one of my go-to guys. So, okay, today we're going to continue our prep for WCQ by removing the surprise, and that surprise is going to be, of course, Rikka Sunavalon. Do you think that this deck has been like under the radar for most people?
Yeah, I think so. It feels like not a lot of North American players are really playing it. From what I've seen, like a lot of European players are playing it at the events, but like here, it's almost like there's no forests, no plants to be grown or anything, so.
It's kind of surprising, yeah, for sure, because like, it's a combo deck. It's a solid combo deck. It plays with like an end board that's very similar to like Dragon Link. There's so much removal, and I don't know why it's not more popular. Maybe it's because it's plants, but who knows? Like, people like to have their barbecues here, and
no one's
most
people green. So.
Yeah, exactly. People love their Kashtira, Labyrinth, Sprite, Runics with like the for hire build or the live twin build, branded Swordsoul, Gold Pride, Cyburst, Bestial Dragonlings, but not Rikka Sunavalons. And okay, I can tell you for sure, guys, as a little bit of extra tip here, this is the one matchup you don't want to sit across needing to read their cards, because best case scenario, even if you do win a game, you're gonna lose in time. That's the best case scenario for you, if you have to sit across them and you have to read their cards. There's so much to read, there's so many effects, and there's so many like, oh, if they did this, and if they tributed an extra card for cost, they do something else. Like, you don't want to be in that position. So that's why you guys are here, and that's why we're here. So today we're going to be delivering how to beat Rikka Sunavalon in a readable fashion. We're going to tell you what they do, what's their most common end board, and if you guys want to watch the comboing 100%, just check out Jessica's video. Covers every combo possible, okay? Just go to that video. It's also down in the description. But you know what? Let's get started. So, monsters that we have to pay attention to, or the cards we have to pay attention to. First of all, this build could have multiple end boards. Some of them which would involve Therian Regulus being there as an additional negate. So Therian Regulus, one Omni negate. Rikka Princess is a monster negate, and a lot of the interaction kind of tags along with Con. You want to explain what Con does?
Yeah, Con is like their main field spell that allows them to tribute your monsters as if they were their own plants, and then it also allows them to set a Rikka card from their deck as well. So Rikka Sheet.
Yeah, Rikka Sheet, and Rikka Sheet is essentially it's a Widow Anchor. It's their Widow. They're gonna negate the monster and take it over. It gets pretty annoying really fast, especially when you pair it with Con, and a lot of these cards, they have a cost. So whenever something activates its cost and the cost itself already removes your card, you've already lost the interaction. You're starting at a deficit right away in that interaction, and you don't even get to use the monster that you put on board if there was like a chainable effect. So that's like a really big part of it. There's also Hyperiton, which is the rank 9 plant monster, can detach, negate, and depending on the material it detaches, it has to basically match whatever that it is trying to negate. And then there's also Teardrop, which has a detach quick effect to tribute away your monster. Yeah, tribute your cards. A lot of it's related to tributing, but you can see that this whole end board is based off of negating your stuff, taking over your stuff, and just tributing your stuff. So
lots of tributing.
Lots of tributing. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the end board. So in terms of negations, Rikka Princess, Hyperiton, and then there's Rikka Sheet, because it's also a negation. In terms of removal, the Rikka Princess plus the Con would tribute off your monster to negate your effect, which acts as a double whammy for you. And then there's also Therian Regulus, which is also negation. So if you do a card-for-card trade, they could probably win out the entire interaction because of them being able to trade 4 cards. Now, in terms of stuff that you have to be aware about them, is that they do do have certain areas which would lock themselves into plants, which normally doesn't really matter because their entire deck is more or less made out of plants, except for Therian Regulus. So there's that.
It's a it's really just a forest, you know? Everything's a plant, everything is growing, and then there's a random machine just in the middle of the forest that negates stuff.
The machine Lion King is here. But okay, some of these, they only lock you into extra deck plants, like Sowing. Sowing unlocks your extra deck cards into plants, so that's why the Regulus can still come out. Whereas if they activate Petal, or I believe Petal or Concon, both of these, I think that's perma plant lock, so these are some of the areas you need to be aware of. Sometimes it does matter because they do have an OTK play that comes from Thrasher, and Thrasher lets them steal your monster after destroying it by battle, but they can't really take it unless it's a plant or it's Dracostapelia, because that is a plant, because that's a Predator plant. But that aside, these are the cards that you have to be aware of. These are the things that you have to pay attention to. Rika Princess, probably in the graveyard, so check the graveyard before you make any sort of play, or you're going to lose a lot of cards.
Hiding there, you know, ready to tribute away when you least expect it.
Okay, now we're going to jump into hand traps. Some of you guys probably just skipped straight to this part anyway, but here we go. Hand traps. Let's start with the hand trap that everybody is running. Ash Blossom, Joyous Spring. What do you hit with this? Well, unfortunately, this is actually one of the weaker hand traps. There are certain choke points you can hit, such as, you know, Sunvine Sowing, the spell card, so that you can stop them from summoning out from their deck. But the problem is, if they do have an actual follow-up, or they started off with Unexpected Die, they probably have a normal summon to follow up on that. And therefore, it could result in a whole lot of nothing. And when things actually go too far off, once like the Jasmine resolves, and if they are actually playing the Therion package, then you're kind of stuck like stopping... You're basically stuck stopping them from getting a Regulus, because now you're going to have to trade at some point with that Regulus, and giving Regulus the option to negate whatever it wants is not exactly ideal for you anyway. So maybe down the line, you're not even able to stop the Rika Glamour. But if in a case where they do start with a Rika Glamour because they didn't actually start with some of the Sun Seed and the low side or anything like that, then you can probably hit their Glamour, especially if they tribute with that Glamour. Or you've held onto your Ash long enough for that Glamour to go live, and maybe you've countered maybe the Therion stuff, or maybe they're not playing the Therion stuff, then you can probably get a better trade with that, because then now they're losing a monster and their Glamour to go with it. And that's a double search that you prevented with Ash. But otherwise, Ash is kind of weak. Why don't I pass it off to you for the next one? Droll Lockbird.
Yeah, so Droll Lockbird is very powerful. I think this deck does like a lot of searching, so they're constantly adding cards to their hand. Obviously, like the first card that they add, if you can catch them on that, then a lot of times their boards are going to be a lot suboptimal, because they're not going to be able to add like some of the plants, for example, the Rika cards, which all do a bunch of searching, being able to add Glamour, and then being able to activate Glamour and add more cards. So I think Droll is a nice card to have against them if you can side it in.
Yeah, I know it's a pretty popular option right now. Now, a lot of you guys also have like Effect Veilers and Imperm. There is one particular choke that is huge against this deck, and it is not a Sunvine card. It is not a Rika card. It is Aromaseraphy Jasmine, the Link monster. That one in particular, when it's summoned out, you can probably leave it alone for the most part, but once it gains life, this is the part where you chain onto it so that it's not able to add a plant monster straight from the deck, and it's actually a double hit here. The second thing you prevent is that now that Jasmine is not going to tribute off one of the monsters to summon basically a Lone Fire Blossom straight out of the deck. So you're stopping them from getting any of the monsters out straight from the deck, and you're also preventing like further tributing coming from plant monsters, which is actually really huge, because that's what leads to the big boards where you get the multi-negates. But what happens after you hit them here, they're likely only going to link into a Bengal Lancer, which provides them with one bounce, and that is way easier than like 4 or 5 negates plus a bunch of tributes.
Yeah, deal with one plant instead of the whole forest, right?
Yeah, exactly. You just unroot them. You just unroot the whole thing right there. Now, another point to hit them is with a Nibiru. What are your thoughts on Nibiru against this matchup?
I think Nibiru can be very high impact. You know, they don't set up a lot of Omni negates. The issue is sometimes they can get some of the Rika cards like Strenna out that actually benefit from getting tributed. So if they're putting that up before you Nibiru, then when you Nibiru, they're still going to be able to special summon out the XYZs from their deck. still get like a Rika monster on the field that tributes during your turn. But I still think it's good enough. It's high impact that you can catch them off guard. Ideally before they, start searching, and with the Arrow Sesame Jasmine as well.
Yeah.
Because that's like a critical choke point, I think, tapping into their deck.
Yes. Definitely stop a whole lot of stuff if you can hit the Jasmine. Also, if you're playing against Cashier, they're probably gonna hit you with Shifter. So Shifter is actually really good because they do use the graveyard. If you stun them out of their graveyard, they can't revive the low side from the graveyard. That means the Melius is also kind of useless because there's no low side to revive. I believe the Sunsea Twin can't summon anything from the graveyard either. So there's they lose a lot of bodies and follow up once you hit them with the Shifter. And I'm gonna pass it to you for the Bell and DD Crow.
Yeah, I think Bell and Dita Crow, they're a lot less high impact. I would say there's certain things that you can hit, like the Rika Princess that's in the graveyard. So then that way, you're protected from being negated. Also, Rika Princess can tribute your monsters when they have Concon, so getting rid of that is ideal. Fortunately, the tribute is a cost, so Ghost Spell here is a little bit worse because if they're tributing your monsters and you Ghost Spell, it's still going to tribute as cost. But if they're tributing their own monsters, the Ghost Spell just has some value there. It hits the Rika Princess. You're able to hit some other things like the Sunsea Twin as well. So kind of acts like a hand trap as a pseudo 1-for-1, but I think they're a little mid. But the nice thing about DD Crow is you can hit the Rika Pedo as well, which happens to somehow jump out of the graveyard during your end phase. So that's
right. That's huge.
Yeah.
And Rika Pedo also provides them with even more cards while it's on the field. Think about it as their version of Cashier Birth. It's a fair way of thinking about it. They're gaining advantage on just having the body.
Yep.
Okay, so that's really it for hand traps. I think most other hand traps are just not as effective. You can't really use the Bestial cards because they're not dark. Of all attributes, dark is basically the one that they are not. So these are probably the best ones that you can work with. All right, our next lesson here, Board Breakers. Luckily, this is one of the decks that do not exactly have a ton of Omni Negates. Sometimes in a sided game, you might see stuff like Solemn Judgment, shoved in there. But for the most case here, they have several pretty big weaknesses. I'm going to start with the very first one. A lot of their stuff are pretty monster reliant, so Dark Ruler No More does shut down a lot. But there's two things it does not answer. One is the Rika Princess in the graveyard, and the second thing is that if they did manage to get to the Rika Sheet, then you have to answer to a Rika Sheet, and therefore the Concon is also still active. So even though you can Dark Ruler them, it does give you a little bit of mobility, a little bit of wiggle room to play, but your cards are still going to get tributed and negated. So it's not like you're home free just yet. You need to find some way to basically clear off that particular field spell. And so, I'm just going to tag it in here. One of the best ways to do that is spell trap removal. If you have spell trap removal, you answer to a whole lot less. Mainly the Princess and the Teardrop that's on the field, and the Sheet. Those are some of the cards that you're actually taking care of when you have spell trap removal. Removing the field spell answers a lot of stuff on its own, but that's why you kind of need to play something to take care of that field spell. It's literally just Lair of Darkness here.
Totally, yeah, they tribute your stuff. Not to mention, they might counterside some spicy floodgates. Things like Rivalry of the Warlords might just come out in Game 2, Game 3. So having the back row removal for that is super important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are other ways to kind of break a board. What about the big, mass board wipes?
Yeah, I think like Dark Hole, if you're playing that, or if you're playing something like a Kaiju Slumber, even like Lightning Storm, Raigeki, they get a lot of value. You're getting rid of the monsters that are pretty much posing the issue for you to begin with. They're getting 2 or 3 interactions on Bangalancer, the XYZ's Teardrop, so on and so forth. So just getting rid of those makes it a lot more easier for you to play through Engine, I think. Just having to deal with the Concon and the Set Rika Sheet and maybe the Princess in the graveyard, which they have to control a Rika monster. So getting rid of the monsters means that Princess could just be lying there in the graveyard, unable to activate.
That's true. These are great ways to actually clear. And luckily for us, cards like Dark Hole and Raigeki, they do have, they share counters against other matchups in this current format, such as Vanquished Soul. Even Kashtira to some degree, you can just blow up their whole board, not really worry about it. A lot of people are not really keeping some of their Kashtira Shangri-Eras on the field anymore because blocking one zone doesn't really matter too much. So you might get away with just using stuff like Dark Hole. So it does give you the coverage. And not only that, there's another card that's also really good at the cost of your battle phase. Of course, it's going to be evenly matched. Another really good board wipe. But you're gonna need to like deal with Etherean Regulus. You need to somehow bait that card out. Otherwise, it's totally not worth it. And it's not the easiest thing to bait out sometimes, especially when they know you're trying so hard just so that, you know, you keep an empty board. There's a big tell when someone's keeping their board empty while trying to force you to activate stuff. Like, oh, they're gonna activate a bunch of spells, but they're not really putting anything on board. Like, am I reading it evenly here? Like, these are the biggest tells here. And like another board breaker would be Lava Golem. Lava Golem, these tribute based stuff that don't offer interaction, they're very key to just taking away the Rikka name. That's one good thing, because taking away the Rikka will prevent the tribute and the negation from monster effects coming from the Rikka Princess. But that's actually kind of really key here. That's like a 2-for-1. And then you can also tribute off, if you use a Lava Golem, you can even potentially even take away a negate like a Hyperiton or even like a Regulus. So you're getting like 3 things removed for 1 card at the cost of course, your normal summon. So that's still worth it. And there's actually another tech that you kind of mentioned as well that's like a 1-for-2.
Yeah, so this is a card that I know everyone's forgotten about, because when it came out, everyone was hyping it, but then suddenly fell off the map. But this is called Ultimate Slayer. So this card I really like because that has a lot of crossover in the matchup, and especially in this Rikka matchup, you can target either an XYZ like Teardrop, and you can send something called Mirrorologic Aggregator, which allows you to negate a face-up card when it's sent to the graveyard. So you can actually target things like Concon on the field. It's not restricted just to monsters, or you can target one of their other monsters that are causing you issues like Bang Lancer. Alternatively, you could also send a link targeting the Bang Lancer, so you can send Tri-Brigade Arms Bicephalus too, which allows you to Foolish Ikarura and draw a card, or you can play the Evil Twins as well, so you can dump the key skill from your deck and then send non-targeting. So just some very nice crossover there, I think, with the card. And a lot of decks have a lot of extra deck space, so like Kashtira, you have a lot of space now, so maybe this is a card that could actually find its way to side deck if you're going second. And it's good against other matchups too, Vanquish Soul, so on and so forth. They can't respond with monster effects, so kind of nice. Mini Dark Ruler.
All right. Actually sounds pretty good. So these are kind of the board breakers I would go for. I would say that resolving some of these cards would just result in like a straight blowout against that matchup. You would clear the field, no problem, and you don't really have to worry too much. As we already kind of explained the hand trap, we already dealt with the, you know, the choke points that they have. But like, let's move on to what if you get to go first now. You gotta somehow win this. And note that most likely they're gonna side stuff like evenly matches against you. They're gonna find ways to kind of break down your board and try to set up their exact same board against you. But once you've committed resources, they really don't need their full board to counter you. If they're able to stop your entire board, like wipe it out, and then set up a mini version of their board, you're still gonna find it very struggling to deal with their board because of the amount of tributing that they're doing against you. Because at this point, the removal themselves are going to affect your tempo. You're not going to be able to establish what you're trying to do, and when you pass turn on that, you might get OTK'd because they have a Thrasher OTK that you can't really stop, and it doesn't actually require that many resources to kind of end on a double attacking Thrasher. So shutdown cards number 1. I'll do the floodgates here. Gozen and, you know, there can be only one. Both of these work. They side in rivalry. We can counter side with our own floodgates. We have Gozen match and TC Boo. TC Boo probably be the better one because that deck is so locked into plants, and they have the plant restriction, which kind of forces them into just playing plants, that there can be only one doesn't let them play at all. It's a full-on shutdown. Yeah. And then Gozen match is a funnier one. Like, you would think that Gozen match, like, oh, their plants are earth, but they're not just earth. They have wind, they have water, and then if they want to mix and match, that's where they get the problem. And they have light as well. I believe Aromaseraphy is a light.
I think so, yeah. They have a mixture of all sorts of attributes. It's kind of
funny.
They
can't get into the cards that they want if you actually flip a Gozen on them. Correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe they'll find some way to shove in, like, maybe a Kashtira, like Fenrir, because that's an Earth. That's an option, maybe. But let's just put it there. Like, Gozen, if Gozen goes unchecked, they will struggle to, you know, take the next step within their own combo. Now, what are some other things that you would choose to play if you have to go first?
Yeah, I think one of the good cards, we were actually talking about Droll and the hand traps, but one of the spell cards is actually Shared Ride. And the thing I like about this card is that it adds a card every time your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, obviously except by drawing. So it's really interesting. It kind of puts them on a semi-max C. The more they add, the more you draw into, and I think it pairs really well with a lot of hand traps, things like Nibiru, things like Effect Failure, so on and so forth, that you can draw into with Shared Ride. So the more greedy they get, the more chance of a blowout can happen because you're drawing into more of your hand traps, and if they're not able to end the game there on the spot, on your turn you're either going to have a bunch of board breakers or like a bunch of cards in your hand that you can just use to wipe out their board and then proceed from there.
I really like the Shared Ride because if they choose to go into evenly and wipe out your board, you can completely recuperate your resources along the way and maybe just counterplay them along, like as a part of drawing those outs as you go. So that's definitely really good. And then other cards that I would recommend going first, while I would consider still siding, would be Cosmic Cyclone. You don't want them to break your board, because if they can get into Con and leave the Con on board, Con is going to rip your board apart. Like, because of the Layer of Darkness effect of being able to tribute your stuff for cost, as long as they have to tribute a plant, they switch their entire cost for tributing your monster. So you can't leave that card on board, so you should probably immediately get rid of it. And there's actually a thing that you should know about this entire deck. A lot of their cards aren't actually once per turn. That is one thing that a lot of people underestimate about this deck, is that there's a lot of stuff that's actually not once per turn, and that can get very frustrating very fast. You gotta be careful about when they play multiple copies of Con. Wait for them to activate the set card, chain it, get rid of it, and hope that they don't have another copy.
Yeah, because it could snowball, and then all of a sudden your entire board's getting tributed, and they're setting Ricochet from their deck as well. So
yeah, and them stealing your monster is not very fun. So these are some of the cards that I would recommend if you're going to be playing like Floodgates. But if you were to go first and just using your own deck and just using your own text, then what I would recommend is to clear out the monsters as they come up. You can't let them convert the plant bodies into the actual combo pieces. You should probably do whatever you can to understand the matchup that, hey, Jasmine is a big choke point. You should still prevent it. And if you can prevent it with your own in-engine stuff, you should probably do that.
Absolutely, yeah. Just, taking 1-for-1s as well, getting rid of their field spell, preventing their monsters from handling the board. The minute Rika monsters hit the board, that means that in-hand Rika Princess is live, so that's just one thing to be aware of. Your effect monsters could just get negated, so just have a heads up on that for sure.
Yep. I would recommend stuff like Solemn Judgment. And you know what? That kind of sums it up on how to beat, this particular deck. This is the deck that is a 1-card combo. They have 6 ways to start it off really easy, and they have multiple ways to kind of just pivot from just the Rika monsters into the same combo. So don't underestimate this deck. They have multiple end boards that can Cactus Bouncer, lock you out of special summoning. They could go Rose Whip. There's a lot of stuff that this deck can do just to prevent you from playing, and ultimately I think that preventing them from getting to that point is probably the best way to play against them.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And I guess the only other thing to note about the deck is they play such a big engine, so you have to expect board breakers being sided in their deck when they're going second, right? So it's probably going to be a lot more high impact cards, things like Triple Tactics Talent, evenly, like you mentioned, Tom, even things like Nibiru. So just I would say be more aware of the high impact board breaker cards that they're going to be bringing in against you.
Yeah. Well, that is all we got for this video. Hopefully we kind of helped you break down what they're trying to do against you, and what you can do about it. And guys, don't forget, go check out Squiddy's channel if you guys want some more help on stuff for WCQ. I'm definitely going to be looking out for it. And go there, hit subscribe, ding his notification bell. Really helpful stuff. Really helpful stuff. And
thank you so much for having me on here, Tom. Always
no, thanks for coming on. I can't, it's really good to kind of talk about these couches with someone. And don't forget to hit my like button, hit subscribe, ding that notification bell, and I will see you all in the next one.